The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when Marcus Whitmore heard the faint crying through the howling wind. At first, he thought it was just another coyote, but something about the sound made him pause at his kitchen window. The snow was coming down so hard he could barely see past his front porch. But there it was again, a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness of Montana's Glacier Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus pulled on his heaviest coat and stepped into the storm. What he found huddled against his barn door would change everything he thought he knew about family, forgiveness, and second chances. The wind cut through the valley like a knife, carrying with it the kind of cold that Montana ranchers knew could kill. Marcus Whitmore had lived through 43 winters in Glacier Valley, and he'd learned to read the signs. This storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. He'd been living alone on the Whitmore Ranch for the better part of 5 years now, ever since his divorce from Patricia had been finalized. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, sprawling across 800 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land in the state. His grandfather had built the main house with his own hands back in 1952, and his father had expanded it, adding the wraparound porch and the second story that overlooked the valley. Now it was just Marcus, his cattle, and the ghosts of better times. The crying sound came again, more desperate this time. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and pushed through the knee-deep snow toward the barn. The wind was so fierce it nearly knocked him off his feet twice, but something drove him forward. In all his years on the ranch, he'd never heard anything quite like it. As he rounded the corner of the barn, his flashlight beam caught something that made his heart stop. Huddled against the wooden door, barely visible under a thin blanket that was already covered in snow, was a young woman. She was clutching something to her chest, and as Marcus got closer, he realized it was a baby. "Dear God," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside them. The woman looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of desperation and resignation. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair that was matted with snow and clothes that were completely inadequate for the storm. Her lips were blue, and she was shivering so violently she could barely speak. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "My baby. She's so cold." Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped both of them up, surprised by how light they felt, and carried them toward the house. The woman didn't resist, which told him everything he needed to know about how desperate their situation had become. Inside the warmth of his kitchen, Marcus could finally get a good look at them. The woman was young, maybe younger than he'd initially thought, with delicate features and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. The baby, wrapped in what looked like a hospital blanket, was tiny, probably no more than a few weeks old. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently as he helped the woman into a chair by the wood stove. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Chun. And this is Emma." Marcus noticed she didn't offer a last name for the baby, but he didn't press. He'd learned over the years that people had their reasons for keeping certain things to themselves. "How long were you out there?" he asked, already moving to start a pot of coffee and heat some soup. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Hours, maybe. We were ... we were dropped off. They said someone would come for us, but nobody did." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had abandoned this young mother and her newborn baby in the middle of a blizzard. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. "Who dropped you off?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Sarah hesitated, looking down at her baby. My ex-boyfriend's family. They said I wasn't welcome anymore, that I was on my own now." Her voice cracked. "They drove me out here and said someone from social services would pick us up, but..." She didn't need to finish. Marcus could fill in the blanks. No social worker was coming out in this storm, and even if they had been, They never would have found Sarah and Emma against the barn. "Well, you're safe now," Marcus said firmly. "Both of you." As Sarah slowly warmed up and the color returned to her cheeks, the whole story began to emerge. She'd been dating Trevor Blackwood, whose family owned one of the largest construction companies in the state. When she'd gotten pregnant, Trevor had initially seemed supportive, even talking about marriage. But as her pregnancy progressed, his family had made their feelings clear. They didn't approve of Sarah's background. She'd grown up in foster care, had no family money, and worked as a waitress at a diner in Billings. The breaking point had come when Emma was born. Trevor's mother, Victoria Blackwood, had taken one look at the baby and decided that this wasn't the kind of grandchild she wanted associated with the family name. She'd convinced Trevor that Sarah was trying to trap him, that the baby might not even be his, and that the best thing for everyone would be to end the relationship. Trevor changed completely, Sarah explained, holding Emma close as the baby slept peacefully for the first time in hours. One day he was talking about getting a place together, and the next day he was telling me that we were done. His mother had lawyers draw up papers saying he'd pay child support if I agreed never to contact the family again. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. He'd seen this kind of thing before: wealthy families who thought they could treat people like disposable objects. It reminded him too much of his own past, of the way Patricia's family had looked down on him for being just a rancher. "So they just drove you out here and left you?" he asked. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria said they knew someone who worked with the county, that there was a program for single mothers like me. She said if I went along with it, they'd make sure Emma and I were taken care of." I was desperate, and I believed her. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Victoria Blackwood had essentially kidnapped Sarah and her baby, driven them to the middle of nowhere during a blizzard, and abandoned them to die, all to protect her family's reputation. "The roads are completely impassable," Marcus said, glancing out the window at the continuing storm. "Looks like you'll be staying here for a while." Sarah's face crumpled. "I don't have any money. I can't pay you, and I don't have anywhere else to go. The apartment I was renting, I had to give it up when Emma was born, because I couldn't work anymore, and Trevor stopped helping with the rent." "Did I ask for money?" Marcus said gently. "You and Emma are welcome to stay as long as you need to." The gratitude in Sarah's eyes was almost overwhelming, but Marcus could also see the fear there. She'd been betrayed by people she'd trusted, abandoned by the father of her child, and left to die by his family. It would take time for her to believe that anyone could show her genuine kindness without expecting something in return. Over the next few hours, as the storm continued to rage, outside, Marcus found himself learning more about Sarah's life. She'd aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to make something of herself. She'd worked multiple jobs to pay for community college classes, dreaming of becoming a nurse someday. She'd been saving money and making plans when she'd met Trevor at the diner where she worked. "He seemed different from the other guys who came in," she said, gently rocking Emma as the baby fussed. "He actually listened when I talked, asked about my classes, my dreams. I thought he really cared about me." Marcus recognized the pattern. Trevor had probably enjoyed the novelty of dating someone from a different world, someone who was impressed by his money and status. But when reality set in, when Sarah became pregnant and his family made their disapproval clear, his true character had emerged. "What about your plans to become a nurse?" Marcus asked. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Hard to go to nursing school when you don't have anywhere to live or anyone to watch your baby. I had to withdraw from my classes when I couldn't pay the tuition anymore." As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Marcus set Sarah and Emma up in his guest room. The room had been his office before the divorce, but he'd converted it into a spare bedroom afterward, thinking maybe his sister might visit from Seattle someday. She never had. But now he was grateful for the preparation. Sarah seemed overwhelmed by the simple kindness of clean sheets, a warm room, and a safe place to sleep. She kept thanking him, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone would help her without wanting something in return. "You don't need to keep thanking me," Marcus told her as he brought her some of his ex-wife's old clothes that she'd left behind. "This is what people should do for each other." But even as he said it, Marcus knew that his own motivations were entirely selfless. The house had been so quiet for so long, filled with nothing but his own thoughts and regrets. Having Sarah and Emma there, hearing a baby's cry and a young woman's laughter, brought something back to life in those rooms that he'd thought was gone forever. The truth was, Marcus had always wanted children. He and Patricia had tried for years, going through fertility treatments and adoption processes that had ultimately failed. The stress of it had contributed to the breakdown of their marriage, and when Patricia had finally left, she'd made it clear that she blamed him for their inability to have a family. "Maybe it's better this way," she'd said during one of their final arguments. "You're so wrapped up in this ranch and your dead father's legacy that you don't have room in your heart for anything else anyway." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now listening to Emma's soft breathing through the guest room door and knowing that Sarah was finally safe and warm, Marcus wondered if maybe Patricia had been wrong. Maybe his heart was bigger than either of them had realized. The storm continued through the night, and by morning the snow had piled up to the windows. Marcus woke early, as he always did, and started coffee before checking on his unexpected guests. He found Sarah already awake, sitting by the window and feeding Emma a bottle. "How did you sleep?" he asked quietly. "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "I forgot what it felt like to not be afraid." The simple statement hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. This young woman had been living in fear of poverty, fear of homelessness, fear for her baby's safety. And now, for the first time in who knows how long, she felt safe. "The roads won't be clear for days," Marcus said, looking out at the blanket of white that covered everything as far as the eye could see. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to." Sarah looked at him with something approaching wonder. "Why are you being so kind to us? You don't even know us." Marcus considered the question. Why was he doing this? Was it loneliness, guilt over his failed marriage? Or was it something simpler, the basic human instinct to help someone in need? "Maybe because everyone deserves a second chance," he said finally. "And maybe because this old house has been too quiet for too long." As the days passed and the storm gradually cleared, Marcus found himself settling into a routine that felt more natural than anything had in years. He'd wake early to tend to the cattle and handle the ranch work, then come back to find Sarah making breakfast with Emma, sleeping peacefully in a makeshift crib they'd created from a dresser drawer. Sarah was a good cook, better than Marcus had been in his years of bachelor living. She had a way of making simple ingredients taste like something special, and she insisted on pulling her weight around the house despite Marcus's protests that she was still recovering from childbirth. "I'm not a charity case," she said one morning, as she folded his laundry. "If I'm staying here, I'm going to contribute." Marcus could see the pride behind her words, the determination not to be seen as helpless or dependent. He recognized it because he'd felt the same way growing up, when his family had struggled to keep the ranch afloat and he'd been too proud to accept help from neighbors. But there was something else developing between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Marcus found himself looking forward to coming back to the house each day, to Sarah's smile and Emma's gurgles and the sense of life that filled the rooms. And Sarah seemed to be relaxing more each day, the fear gradually leaving her eyes as she realized that Marcus's kindness wasn't conditional. The turning point came on the fourth day, when Marcus's neighbor Jake Morrison called to check on him. "Heard you had some excitement during the storm," Jake said, his voice crackling through the old landline. "Tommy Brennan was out clearing roads yesterday and said he saw tracks leading to your place." Marcus glanced at Sarah, who was listening. From the kitchen doorway with Emma in her arms, he could see the fear returning to her eyes, the worry that maybe she'd brought trouble to the man who'd saved her life. "Just some folks who got caught in the storm," Marcus said carefully. "They're fine now." "Well, that's good to hear. You know, there's been some talk in town. The Blackwoods are asking around about a young woman and a baby, saying she stole something from them. Victoria Blackwood even called the sheriff's office, claiming this girl kidnapped her son's child." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Blackwoods weren't content to have abandoned Sarah and Emma to die in the storm. Now they were trying to paint Sarah as a criminal, probably to cover their own tracks and protect their reputation. "Is that so?" Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Yeah, it's strange though. If this girl really kidnapped the baby, why would Victoria Blackwood wait 4 days to report it? And why wouldn't they have contacted the police right away instead of handling it themselves?" Jake was asking the right questions, but Marcus knew that money and influence could make inconvenient questions disappear. The Blackwoods had enough of both to rewrite the story however they wanted. After he hung up the phone, Marcus found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with tears streaming down her face. "They're going to take Emma away from me," she whispered. "They're going to say I kidnapped her, and who's going to believe me over them?" Marcus sat down across from her, his mind racing. The Blackwoods were powerful, but they weren't untouchable. And they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd left Sarah and Emma to die. And Marcus was a witness to their condition when he'd found them. "They're not taking anything from you," he said firmly. "We're going to fight this." "We?" Sarah looked up at him with surprise and hope warring in her eyes. "We," Marcus confirmed. "You and Emma aren't alone anymore." The next morning brought more than just sunshine breaking through the clouds. It brought Sheriff Rebecca Martinez to Marcus's front door, her patrol car crunching through the snow-packed driveway just after breakfast. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as she climbed out, her expression unreadable behind her aviator sunglasses. "Stay calm," Marcus told Sarah, who had gone pale at the sight of the police car. "Remember, you haven't done anything wrong." Sheriff Martinez had been elected 3 years ago, running on a platform of fairness and community service. She was tough but fair, and Marcus respected her. More importantly, she wasn't in the Blackwoods' pocket like some of the other local officials have been over the years. "Morning, Marcus," Sheriff Martinez said when he opened the door. "Mind if I come in? I need to ask you some questions about your house guests." "Of course," Marcus stepped aside, noting that she'd said house guests, not suspects. That was a good sign. Sarah was waiting in the living room, Emma cradled in her arms. She'd dressed carefully that morning, choosing the most conservative clothes from the selection Marcus had provided. She looked young and vulnerable, but also determined. "You must be Sarah Chun," Sheriff Martinez said, removing her hat and settling into the chair Marcus offered. "I'm Sheriff Martinez. I understand you've been staying here since the storm." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied quietly. "Mr. Whitmore saved our lives. I'd like to hear your version of events, if you don't mind. I received a complaint yesterday from Victoria Blackwood claiming that you kidnapped her grandchild and disappeared with her." Sarah's hands tightened around Emma, but her voice remained steady. "Emma is my daughter. I have her birth certificate, and Trevor Blackwood is listed as the father. I never kidnapped anyone." Sheriff Martinez pulled out a small notebook. "Can you walk me through what happened the night of the storm?" Sarah took a deep breath and began her story. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing her relationship with Trevor, the pregnancy, and the way his family had treated her after Emma's birth. When she got to the part about being driven to the ranch and abandoned, her voice wavered slightly. But she pressed on. "Victoria Blackwood told me there was a program for single mothers, that someone from social services would meet us here. She said if I cooperated, Emma and I would be taken care of. I believed her because I was desperate. And how long were you outside before Mr. Whitmore found you? Hours. Emma was so cold, and I thought ... Sarah's voice broke. I thought we were going to die. Sheriff Martinez wrote notes as Sarah spoke, occasionally asking for clarification. Marcus could see that she was taking Sarah's account seriously, treating it as a legitimate complaint rather than the ravings of a disturbed young woman. Mr. Whitmore, the sheriff turned to him. Can you describe their condition when you found them? Marcus recounted the discovery, emphasizing how inadequately dressed they'd been for the weather and how close to hypothermia both Sarah and Emma had been. If I hadn't found them when I did, they wouldn't have survived the night. Sheriff Martinez nodded grimly. That's consistent with what I observed when I examined the scene yesterday. The snow patterns and the sheltered area where you found them suggest they'd been there for several hours. She closed her notebook and looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you directly. Did you take Emma without permission from the Blackwood family? No, Sarah said firmly. Emma is my daughter. I gave birth to her at Billings General Hospital 3 weeks ago. The nurses there can verify that. Trevor was there for the birth, and he signed the acknowledgement of paternity forms. Do you have any documentation with you? Sarah shook her head. Victoria Blackwood said I wouldn't need anything, that it would all be handled by the social services program. I didn't think to bring Emma's birth certificate because I trusted her. Marcus watched Sheriff Martinez's expression carefully. He could see that she was putting the pieces together, and she didn't like what she was seeing. Miss Chun, I'm going to need you to come to the station with me to make a formal statement. This isn't an arrest, she added quickly, seeing the panic in Sarah's eyes. But I need to get everything on record properly. Can Marcus come with me? Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. Sheriff Martinez looked between them with interest. Mr. Whitmore isn't your lawyer, but if he wants to accompany you as a friend, that's fine. The drive to town was tense. Sarah sat in the back of the patrol car with Emma while Marcus followed in his truck. The roads were still treacherous from the storm, but the main routes had been cleared enough for careful driving. At the sheriff's station, they were met by District Attorney Helen Vaughn, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had a reputation for being thorough and incorruptible. Marcus knew her by reputation. She'd prosecuted several high-profile cases against wealthy defendants and wasn't intimidated by money or influence. Ms. Chun, Devon said after introductions were made. I've reviewed the complaint filed by Victoria Blackwood. I have to tell you, there are some significant inconsistencies in her story. Sarah looked hopeful for the first time since the sheriff had arrived. What kind of inconsistencies? Well, for starters, she claims you kidnapped Emma on the night of the storm. But according to hospital records, you were discharged with Emma 3 days before the storm hit. She also claims that Trevor Blackwood has been desperately searching for his daughter, but phone records show he hasn't called the police, the hospital, or any of your known associates. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. The Blackwoods' arrogance had led them to be sloppy with their lies. There's more, Devon continued. I pulled the traffic camera footage from the highway near Marcus's ranch. There's clear video of a black Mercedes SUV registered to Victoria Blackwood, driving toward the ranch around 6 p.m. on the night of the storm, then leaving approximately 20 minutes later. Sarah gasped. That's when they dropped us off. The timing is certainly suggestive. What's more interesting is that Victoria Blackwood didn't report Emma missing until yesterday morning, 4 full days after this alleged kidnapping supposedly took place. In my experience, grandmothers don't wait 4 days to report their grandchildren missing. The picture was becoming clearer. The Blackwoods had tried to arrange Sarah and Emma's deaths to look like a tragic accident, a young mother who got caught in a storm while trying to drive somewhere with her baby. When Marcus had found them alive, The family had been forced to improvise, cooking up the kidnapping story to discredit Sarah and justify their actions. What happens now? Marcus asked. Vaughn leaned back in her chair. Now I have some very pointed questions for the Blackwood family. Ms. Chun, you're free to go. I'd recommend you stay somewhere safe while we sort this out. The Blackwoods are powerful people, and they're going to be very unhappy when they realize their plan has backfired. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Martinez pulled Marcus aside. You know this isn't over, right? The Blackwoods aren't going to just accept defeat and walk away. Marcus nodded. I know. But Sarah and Emma have a right to live their lives without looking over their shoulders. Just be careful. Victoria Blackwood is used to getting her way, and she's not above playing dirty to protect what she sees as her family's interests. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Sarah seemed lost in thought, processing everything that had happened. It wasn't until they were back in Marcus's kitchen, Emma sleeping peacefully in her makeshift crib, that she finally spoke. I can't believe they actually tried to have us killed, she said, her voice hollow with shock. But you survived, Marcus pointed out. And now everyone knows what kind of people they really are. Sarah looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you doing this? You could have just called social services that first night and washed your hands of the whole situation. Instead, you're putting yourself at risk for people you barely know. Marcus considered the question. It was the same one he'd been asking himself for days. Maybe because I know what it's like to be judged by people who think their money makes them better than everyone else. My ex-wife's family never thought I was good enough for her, and they made sure she knew it. Is that why you got divorced? Marcus sat down across from her, surprised by his own willingness to share something so personal. Partly, Patricia wanted the kind of life her parents had: country club memberships, expensive cars, vacations in Europe. She thought the ranch was holding us back, keeping us from being somebody. But this place is beautiful, Sarah said, looking around the kitchen with its hand-hewn beams and stone fireplace. It feels like home. That's what I always thought. But Patricia saw it as a prison. She wanted me to sell it and move to Denver, get into real estate or finance, something that would make us rich and respectable. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What made you realize you were incompatible? Marcus smiled sadly. When she told me that maybe it was good we couldn't have children, because kids would just tie us down to this backwater life even more. That's when I knew we wanted completely different things. The confession hung in the air between them. Sarah reached across the table and touched his hand briefly, a gesture of understanding and sympathy that somehow meant more than all the words of comfort he'd received during the divorce. I'm sorry, she said simply. Don't be. Meeting you and Emma has reminded me why I fought so hard to keep this place. It's not about the money or the status. It's about having somewhere that feels like home, where people can be safe and loved. That afternoon, they got a call from Devon with an update. She'd interviewed Victoria Blackwood and her son Trevor, and their stories had more holes than Swiss cheese. Victoria is claiming that you seduced her son and tricked him into getting you pregnant, Devon reported. She says you've been harassing the family for money and that when they refused to pay, you threatened to disappear with the baby. That's completely false, Sarah said into the phone, which Marcus had put on speaker. I know it is. Trevor's story is even worse. He's claiming he never acknowledged paternity and that you must have forged his signature on the hospital forms. Problem is, the hospital has security footage of him signing the documents, and there are witnesses. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. The Blackwoods were digging themselves in deeper with every lie. The really interesting development, Devon continued, is that I've heard from 2 other women who've had similar experiences with the Blackwood family. Apparently, this isn't the first time they've tried to eliminate inconvenient relationships. Sarah's eyes went wide. You mean they've done this before? Different circumstances, but the same pattern of intimidation and abandonment. One woman was paid to leave town and never contact the family again. Another was threatened with false criminal charges until she agreed to give up her parental rights. The scope of the Blackwoods' cruelty was becoming clear. This wasn't just about Sarah and Emma. It was about a family that saw other people as disposable, whose power had convinced them they were above the law. "What's our next step?" Marcus asked. "We're building a case for attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy. It's going to take time, but I'm confident we can make it stick. In the meantime, I'd strongly advise Miss Chun to stay exactly where she is. You've got the best protection she could ask for: geographic isolation and a witness who can't be bought or intimidated." After the call ended, Sarah and Marcus sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma sleep. The baby had been through so much in her short life, but she seemed content now, surrounded by warmth and safety. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "what happens when this is all over? When the Blackwoods are dealt with and Emma and I don't need protection anymore?" It was a question Marcus had been dreading, even though he'd known it was coming. The truth was, he'd grown attached to having them there. The house felt alive again, full of purpose and love. The thought of going back to the lonely existence he'd had before was almost unbearable. "I guess that depends on what you want," he said carefully. Sarah looked at him with those dark eyes that had held so much pain when he'd first found her, but which now sparkled with something that might have been hope. "I want Emma to grow up somewhere safe, where she's loved and valued for who she is, not for what family she comes from. I want to finish my nursing degree and build a career helping people. And I want to be with someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as a burden or a trophy." She paused, then added quietly, "I want to stay here, Marcus, if you'll have us." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. It was everything he'd hoped to hear, but hadn't dared to expect. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This life isn't easy. Ranch work is hard, the winters are brutal, and the closest neighbor is 5 miles away. It's not the kind of life most people want." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached all the way to her eyes. "Most people haven't lived the kind of life I have. I've been alone and afraid for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about me. This place with you, it feels like coming home." Emma chose that moment to wake up, stretching her tiny arms and making the soft cooing sounds that had become the soundtrack of Marcus's days. Sarah picked her up, and as she did, the baby looked directly at Marcus with those bright, curious eyes. "Besides," Sarah added, settling Emma against her shoulder, "I think Emma has already decided. Look how content she is here." Marcus reached out and gently touched Emma's tiny hand. She grasped his finger with surprising strength, and he felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct so powerful it took his breath away. "Then stay," he said simply, "both of you, for as long as you want." But even as he said the words, Marcus knew that the Blackwoods weren't going to give up easily. They'd already shown they were willing to commit murder to protect their reputation. Now that their plan had failed and they were facing criminal charges, they'd be even more desperate. The real fight was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Marcus was repairing fence posts in the north pasture when he spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Living this far from town, unexpected visitors were always cause for concern, especially with everything that had been happening with the Blackwoods. He shaded his eyes against the afternoon sun and watched as a convoy of black SUVs made their way up his private road. His blood ran cold when he recognized the lead vehicle. Victoria Blackwood had come calling. Marcus dropped his tools and sprinted toward the house, his boots pounding against the frozen ground. Sarah was inside with Emma, probably preparing dinner and unaware that danger was approaching. They'd grown comfortable over the past few weeks, settling into a routine that felt natural and right. Maybe too comfortable. He burst through the kitchen. door to find Sarah bouncing Emma on her hip while stirring something on the stove. She looked up with a smile that immediately faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Victoria Blackwood is here, with backup." Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't panic. Over the week since the storm, Marcus had watched her transform from a terrified young woman into someone with quiet strength and determination. She'd been attending online classes to continue her nursing education, helping with ranch work, and slowly building the confidence that the Blackwoods had tried to destroy. "How many vehicles?" she asked, already moving toward the window. "3, maybe 4 people total." Marcus was already reaching for his rifle, a Winchester that had belonged to his father. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to be caught defenseless either. "Should we call Sheriff Martinez?" "Already on it," Marcus said, dialing with one hand while keeping his eyes on the approaching vehicles. "But they're 20 minutes out, and these people are here now." The SUVs pulled up in front of the house in a formation that was clearly intended to be intimidating. Victoria Blackwood emerged from the lead vehicle wearing a long black coat and an expression of cold fury. She was accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd never done a day of manual labor in their lives, and a third man, who was clearly private security. Marcus stepped onto the front porch with his rifle visible but not pointed at anyone. The message was clear. This was his property, and he was prepared to defend it. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called out, "you're trespassing on private property." Victoria approached with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of getting her way through intimidation and money. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of jewelry that cost more than most people made in a year. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I'm here to collect my granddaughter and resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus replied evenly. "And Emma isn't going anywhere." One of the suited men stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Richard Castellano, attorney for the Blackwood family. We have a court order granting temporary custody of the minor child to Mrs. Blackwood, pending resolution of the criminal charges against Miss Chun." Marcus felt his stomach drop. A court order was serious business, even if it was bogus. "Let me see it." Castellano produced an official-looking document and handed it over. Marcus scanned it quickly, noting the judge's signature and the formal language. It looked legitimate, but something felt wrong about the timing. "This was issued yesterday," Marcus said. "Funny how you didn't go through Sheriff Martinez or Child Protective Services. You came straight here with private security." Victoria's smile was cold as winter wind. "We were concerned about the child's immediate safety. Miss Chun has proven herself to be unstable and potentially dangerous. The only danger Emma has ever faced came from your family," Sarah said, stepping onto the porch with Emma in her arms. She dressed carefully again, choosing clothes that made her look older and more responsible, but Marcus could see the tremor in her hands. "Sarah," Victoria said, her tone shifting to false sympathy, "you're young and confused. You've been through a traumatic experience, and it's clouded your judgment. The best thing for everyone, especially for Emma, is for you to get the help you need while she's cared for by family." "You left us to die," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear. "You drove us to the middle of nowhere during a blizzard and abandoned us. If Marcus hadn't found us, Emma would be dead." "That's a very serious accusation," Castellano interjected. "One that you've made without any proof. Mrs. Blackwood was attempting to connect you with social services when you became agitated and ran off into the storm." The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus could see how they planned to play this, paint Sarah as an unstable young mother who'd endangered her own child, making the Blackwoods look like concerned family members trying to protect an innocent baby. "We have security footage," Marcus said. Camera evidence showing your client dropping Sarah and Emma off and driving away. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Security footage can be misinterpreted. What matters now is Emma's welfare. The security man had been quietly positioning himself during the conversation, Marcus noticed. He was trying to get an angle on the house, probably looking for a way to get inside while they were distracted by the legal maneuvering. The court order is legitimate, Castellano continued. If you interfere with its execution, you'll be in contempt of court and subject to criminal charges yourself. Marcus was trapped. Even if the court order was obtained through corruption or false information, defying it would make him a criminal. And Victoria Blackwood had enough influence to make sure he spent years in prison while Emma disappeared into the family's web of lawyers and money. But Sarah surprised him by stepping forward, Emma still in her arms. "I want to see the court order," she said. Castellano handed her the document with obvious reluctance. Sarah read it carefully, her nursing school education having taught her to pay attention to details and ask the right questions. "This says temporary custody pending resolution of criminal charges against me," she said. "What criminal charges?" Devon told us no charges had been filed. Victoria's lawyer hesitated for just a moment too long. "Charges are pending. The investigation is ongoing." "That's not what this says," Sarah continued, pointing to a specific section. "This refers to charges filed under case number 2024 CR 1847. But if no charges have actually been filed, then this court order is based on false information." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Sarah had caught something that he'd missed in his quick scan of the document. She was thinking clearly under pressure, using her education and intelligence to fight back. "The specific case number is irrelevant," Castellano said, but his tone had shifted slightly. "The important thing is protecting the child." "Actually, it's very relevant," said a new voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Devon climbing out of an unmarked sedan, followed by Sheriff Martinez and two deputies. Marcus had never been so happy to see law enforcement in his life. "Ms. Vaughn," Victoria said smoothly. "How fortunate. Perhaps you can clear up this confusion about the criminal charges against Ms. Chun." "There are no criminal charges against Ms. Chun," Devon replied flatly. "In fact, case number 2024 CR 1847 refers to the charges we filed yesterday against you, Mrs. Blackwood, and your son for attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's composed mask slipped for the first time, revealing the rage and desperation underneath. "That's impossible," Castellano stammered. "My clients have done nothing wrong." "Your clients abandoned a 3-week-old baby and her mother in sub-zero temperatures during a blizzard," Sheriff Martinez said, stepping forward with handcuffs ready. "We have traffic camera footage, witness testimony, and physical evidence. We also have testimony from 2 other women who've been victimized by the Blackwood family's intimidation tactics." Devon turned to Castellano with a look of disgust. "And you, counselor, have presented a fraudulent court order based on non-existent criminal charges. I'll be filing a complaint with the State Bar Association." The court order, it turned out, had been obtained through bribery and false information. Victoria Blackwood had paid a corrupt clerk to create fake paperwork and had found a judge willing to sign it without proper review. It was the kind of corruption that money could buy in certain circles, but it couldn't stand up to actual scrutiny. As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, she finally lost her composure completely. "That baby belongs with her real family," she screamed. "Not with some trashy waitress who trapped my son. Emma deserves better than this. She deserves the Blackwood name and everything that comes with it." "The only thing that comes with the Blackwood name," Sarah said quietly, "is cruelty and entitlement. Emma is better off without it." Trevor Blackwood was arrested at his office an hour later, along with the corrupt clerk who'd helped create the fake court order. The security man Victoria had brought turned out to be unlicensed and was charged with intimidation and trespassing. But the real revelation came when Vaughn's investigation uncovered the full scope of the Blackwood family's crimes. Over the past decade, they'd systematically destroyed the lives of anyone who threatened their carefully constructed image. Women who'd gotten involved with Trevor or his cousins were routinely paid off, threatened, or worse. One woman had been committed to a psychiatric facility on false charges. Another had been framed for theft and sent to prison. They operated like a criminal organization, Vaughan explained to Marcus and Sarah later that evening. They used their money and connections to eliminate problems instead of dealing with them honestly. Emma wasn't their first victim, but she'd be their last. The media attention was immediate and intense. The story of a wealthy family attempting to murder a young mother and baby to protect their reputation captured national headlines. Reporters camped out at the ranch's entrance, desperate for interviews and photographs. Marcus found himself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, but he was amazed by how Sarah handled it. She agreed to several interviews, speaking eloquently about her experience and the broader issue of how wealthy families often escaped consequences for their actions. "This isn't just about me and Emma," she told one television reporter. "This is about a system that allows people with money to treat others as disposable. How many other women have been silenced or destroyed because they couldn't fight back?" The question resonated with viewers across the country. Women came forward with their own stories of being victimized by powerful families. Support groups formed. Legal aid organizations saw an increase in funding and volunteer applications. But for Marcus, the most important moment came 3 days after the arrests. When the media circus had finally died down and the ranch was quiet again, he found Sarah sitting on the front porch, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Regret staying?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Sarah smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Not for a second. This is exactly where we belong." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, careful not to disturb Emma. The baby had grown noticeably in the week since he'd found them in the snow. She was filling out, her cheeks round and pink with health, her eyes bright and curious when she was awake. "I've been thinking," Sarah said quietly, "about names." "Names?" "Emma's last name. Right now it's just Chun from my birth certificate. But Trevor's parental rights are being terminated as part of his plea agreement. Emma won't be a Blackwood anymore." Marcus felt his heart speed up. He'd been hoping for this conversation, but hadn't wanted to push. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking maybe Whitmore," Sarah said, looking up at him with those dark eyes that had first captured his attention. "If you're willing to make it official." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you want to be Emma's father. Legally, officially, permanently. And I'm asking if you want to be my husband." The proposal caught him completely off guard, but as soon as she said the words, Marcus knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. To both questions, yes. Emma chose that moment to wake up, looking between them with those bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. She reached out one tiny hand toward Marcus's face, and when he leaned down, she grasped his nose with surprising strength. "I think that's a yes from Emma too." Sarah laughed as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus held his new family close and marveled at how much his life had changed. A month ago, he'd been a lonely rancher with nothing but regrets and empty rooms. Now he had everything he'd ever wanted, but had given up hope of finding. The Blackwoods had tried to destroy Sarah and Emma, but instead, they delivered them to exactly where they needed to be. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the worst intentions could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Whitmore Ranch, as Sarah adjusted her cap and gown one final time. Today was graduation day for her nursing program, a moment she'd dreamed of but never thought she'd achieve after everything that had happened with the Blackwoods. Marcus stood behind her, struggling with Emma's tiny graduation outfit, a miniature cap and gown that Sarah had insisted on ordering online. Their daughter, now 8 months old and crawling everywhere, was determined to eat the tassel on her cap rather than wear it. "She's going to be a handful," Marcus said, finally managing to secure the tiny mortarboard on Emma's head for approximately 3 seconds before she pulled it off again. "She gets that from her mother," Sarah laughed, spinning around to face him. The engagement ring Marcus had given her 2 months ago caught the light, a simple solitaire that had belonged to his grandmother. They'd decided to wait until after Sarah's graduation to plan the wedding, wanting to focus on building their foundation as a family first. The transformation in Sarah over the past months had been remarkable. The frightened young woman Marcus had found in the snow had blossomed into someone confident and capable. She'd thrown herself into her studies with a determination that amazed him, often staying up late after Emma was asleep to complete assignments and prepare for exams. Her professors had been understanding about her circumstances, allowing her to attend classes remotely when necessary and providing flexibility for clinical rotations. But it wasn't just her education that had flourished. Sarah had become an integral part of the ranch operation, using her natural intelligence and growing medical knowledge to help with veterinary care for the cattle. She'd also started a small garden behind the house, growing vegetables and herbs that had transformed their meals from Marcus's simple bachelor fare into something approaching gourmet. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked, watching her check her appearance one more time in the hallway mirror. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but excited too. I keep thinking about how impossible this seemed 8 months ago." The Blackwood trial had concluded 3 months earlier with guilty verdicts all around. Victoria Blackwood had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Trevor had received 8 years, though his sentence was reduced in exchange for testimony against his mother and cooperation with authorities investigating other victims. The corrupt officials who'd helped them had faced their own consequences, with several losing their positions and facing criminal charges. But perhaps more importantly, the case had sparked real change. New laws had been passed protecting single mothers from intimidation and coercion. A foundation had been established to help women in situations similar to Sarah's. The Vaughn had been nominated for state attorney general on the strength of her prosecution of the case. Emma babbled happily from her high chair, oblivious to the significance of the day but delighted by all the attention. She'd grown into a happy, healthy baby with Marcus's blue eyes and Sarah's determined personality. Watching her reach her milestones, first smile, first laugh, first word, which had been "Papa," much to Marcus's delight, had filled the house with joy in a way that nothing else could have. The drive to Billings for the graduation ceremony was festive, with Emma entertaining herself by playing with a set of keys while Sarah reviewed her valedictorian speech one last time. She'd graduated summa cum laude despite everything she'd been through, an achievement that had earned her acceptance into several prestigious programs for advanced nursing degrees. "I still can't believe you're valedictorian," Marcus said as they pulled into the university parking lot. "I had good motivation," Sarah replied, looking back at Emma. "I wanted to show her that no matter what happens to you, no matter how hopeless things seem, you can still build the life you want if you're willing to work for it." The graduation ceremony was held in the university's main auditorium, a grand space filled with proud families and excited graduates. Marcus found himself surrounded by Sarah's classmates and their families, all of whom had heard the story of the young mother who'd overcome incredible odds to earn her degree. Professor Janet Coleman, the nursing program director, introduced Sarah as the valedictorian with words that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Sarah Whitmore represents everything we hope to instill in our nursing students: resilience, compassion, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to helping others heal. Sarah's speech was brief but powerful, focusing on the idea that healing wasn't just something nurses did for patients, but something that happened in communities when people chose to help rather than harm each other. 8 months ago, I was a young mother with no hope and no future, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Today, I'm a registered nurse with a family who loves me and a community that has supported me. That transformation didn't happen because I was special or deserving. It happened because one person chose to help instead of walking away, and because many other people chose to stand up for what was right instead of what was easy. She paused, looking directly at Marcus in the audience. Sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medicine or procedures, but from the simple act of giving someone a chance to rebuild their life. As nurses, we have the privilege of being part of that healing process every single day. The standing ovation that followed seemed to last forever. Marcus found himself crying openly, overwhelmed by pride and love for the remarkable woman Sarah had become. Emma, sensing the emotion in the room, clapped her tiny hands together in imitation of the adults around her. After the ceremony, they were approached by Dr. Michael Reynolds, the chief of staff at Billings General Hospital. He was a distinguished man in his 60s who had personally overseen the pediatric care Emma had received as a newborn. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, shaking Sarah's hand warmly, "congratulations on your achievement. I wanted to speak with you about an opportunity." Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of opportunity?" "We have an opening in our pediatric unit for a nurse with your qualifications and experience. Given your personal understanding of what families go through in crisis situations, I think you'd be invaluable in that role. The position comes with full benefits and support for continuing education if you decide to pursue a master's degree." Marcus watched Sarah's face carefully. They'd talked about her career plans, but he'd always been careful not to influence her decisions. The ranch was his dream, but he wanted her to have the chance to pursue hers as well. "The only concern," Dr. Reynolds continued, "is that the position would require you to be in Billings Monday through Friday. I know you live quite a distance away." Sarah looked at Marcus, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed of, but it would mean significant changes to their life together. "Could I have some time to discuss it with my family?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The position will be open for the right candidate." As they drove home that evening, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Sarah and Marcus talked through the logistics of the job offer. The commute from the ranch to Billings was over an hour each way, which would mean long days away from home. But there were options. They could find an apartment in town for weekdays, or Sarah could stay with other nurses who were looking for roommates. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked as they pulled into their driveway. "I want to take the job," Sarah said without hesitation. "But I also want to make sure it doesn't damage what we've built here. This ranch, this life we're creating together, it's everything to me." Marcus parked the truck and turned to face her fully. "Then we'll make it work. We'll figure out the logistics, and we'll make sure Emma gets the best of both worlds, a mother who's pursuing her dreams and a stable home base where she knows she's loved." That night, after Emma was settled in her crib, and they'd celebrated Sarah's graduation with a quiet dinner on the front porch, Marcus brought up something he'd been thinking about for weeks. "I've been talking to my lawyer about something," he said, settling into the porch swing beside Sarah. "Oh, what about?" "About setting up a trust fund for Emma's education. The money from the wrongful death settlement we won against the Blackwoods. I want to make sure she never has to worry about paying for college or nursing school or whatever she wants to study." Sarah looked at him with surprise. The settlement had been substantial. The Blackwood family's insurance company had paid millions to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of their wrongdoing. Marcus had been clear that he considered the money to be Emma's, not his, but this was the first time he'd mentioned specific plans for it. "That's incredibly generous," she said. "But are you sure? That money could do a lot for the ranch, or for us. The ranch is doing fine, and we have everything we need," Marcus replied. "Emma deserves to have choices in life, the kind of choices that money can provide. I never want her to feel trapped by circumstances the way you were." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the depth of his commitment to their daughter. "She's so lucky to have you as a father." "I'm the lucky one," Marcus said, wrapping his arm around her. "Both of you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a family." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. Emma's nursery window glowed softly with the nightlight Marcus had installed, and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night created a peaceful backdrop to their thoughts. "I've been thinking about the wedding," Sarah said eventually. "What about it? I want to have it here on the ranch. Nothing fancy or expensive, just our friends and the people who've helped us along the way. Sheriff Martinez, Devon, your neighbors who've been so welcoming," Marcus smiled. "That sounds perfect. When were you thinking?" "Fall, maybe October, when the aspens are changing colors. Emma will be walking by then, so she can be our flower girl." The image of Emma toddling down a makeshift aisle in the front yard, scattering petals and probably eating half of them, made Marcus laugh out loud. "She'll steal the show," he said. "Good. This whole thing started because of her, so she should be the star." As summer turned to fall, their life settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Sarah started her job at the hospital and loved every minute of it, working with families in crisis and using her own experience to provide comfort and support. She'd rented a small apartment in Billings that she used on weekdays, coming home Thursday nights to spend long weekends with Marcus and Emma on the ranch. The arrangement worked better than either of them had expected. Sarah's work energized her and gave her a sense of professional accomplishment, while the ranch remained their sanctuary and home base. Emma thrived with the variety, spending weekdays with Marcus learning about ranch life and weekends with both parents. Marcus had worried initially about managing ranch work and childcare simultaneously, but he discovered that Emma was an excellent companion for his daily rounds. She rode with him in the truck while he checked on cattle, slept peacefully in a baby carrier while he repaired fences, and charmed every visitor to the ranch with her sunny disposition. The wedding, when it finally happened in mid-October, was everything Sarah had envisioned. They'd set up an altar in front of the house, with the valley's golden aspens providing a stunning backdrop. Emma, now walking confidently and wearing a miniature version of Sarah's dress, did indeed steal the show by abandoning her flower-scattering duties to chase a butterfly halfway through the ceremony. Sheriff Martinez officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Vaughan served as Sarah's matron of honor, while Jake Morrison stood up as Marcus's best man. The guest list was small but meaningful: neighbors, colleagues from the hospital, and a few relatives from Marcus's extended family who'd driven up from Wyoming. But the most meaningful moment came during the exchange of vows, when Sarah included words she'd written specifically for Emma. "I promise to love and honor not just my husband, but the family we're creating together. I promise to show our daughter every day what it means to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and building over destruction." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, to a song playing from speakers set up on the porch, Marcus marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than a year ago, he'd been a lonely man convinced that his chance at happiness had passed him by. Now he was surrounded by love, laughter, and the promise of a future filled with possibilities. Emma fell asleep in his arms during the reception, exhausted by all the excitement and attention. As he carried her to her crib, She stirred just enough to wrap her tiny arms around his neck and whisper, "Papa," in her sleep. Standing in the doorway of Emma's room, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in the home where she'd found safety and love, Marcus reflected on the words Sarah had spoken during her graduation speech. Sometimes the greatest healing really did come from the simple act of giving someone a chance to rebuild their life. The Blackwoods had intended to destroy Sarah and Emma, to erase them from existence to protect their family's reputation. Instead, they delivered them to exactly where they belonged, to a place where they could heal, grow, and build something beautiful together. Sarah appeared beside him in the doorway, still in her wedding dress but with her shoes in her hand, and her hair slightly messed from dancing. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "Just how perfect this all is," Marcus replied, wrapping his arm around his wife. "How lucky we all are to have found each other." Sarah smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "You know what I love most about this story?" "What's that?" "It's not a rescue story. It's a story about three people who saved each other." Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter, then at his remarkable wife, and knew she was absolutely right. They hadn't just survived the storm that had brought them together. They'd used it to build something stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have created alone. Outside the Montana, wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the promise of winter and the certainty of spring to follow. Inside the Whitmore Ranch, three hearts beat in rhythm with the ancient promise that love, when freely given and gratefully received, can heal even the deepest wounds and create miracles from the most broken pieces. The story that had begun with abandonment and cruelty had become one of redemption and hope. And as Sarah had said during her valedictorian speech, sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medicine or procedures, but from the simple act of giving someone a chance to rebuild their life. They had given each other that chance, and in return, they had found their forever family. 2 years after the wedding, the Whitmore Ranch had transformed into something neither Marcus nor Sarah could have imagined. What had started as a simple cattle operation had evolved into a thriving community hub, thanks to an idea Sarah had proposed during one of their evening conversations on the front porch. "What if we used some of the settlement money to help other women?" she'd suggested, watching 3-year-old Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Women who are in situations like I was, pregnant, alone, with nowhere to turn." The idea had taken root quickly. Working with Dia Vaughn, who had indeed been elected state attorney general, they'd established the Emma's Hope Foundation. The foundation provided temporary housing, job training, and legal assistance for single mothers escaping abusive or exploitative situations. The ranch's guest house had been expanded into a proper residence facility, capable of housing 6 women and their children at a time. Marcus stood in the doorway of the new community center they'd built behind the main house, watching Sarah lead a group therapy session for the current residents. She'd completed her master's degree in psychiatric nursing the previous year, specializing in trauma recovery. Her own experience gave her a credibility with these women that no amount of textbook knowledge could provide. "The thing about trauma," Sarah was saying to the group, "is that it doesn't just happen to you. It tries to convince you that it defines who you are. But you get to decide what defines you. You get to write the next chapter of your story." In the circle were 6 women in various stages of rebuilding their lives. There was Maria Santos, a 22-year-old who'd fled an abusive marriage with her twin toddlers. Jessica Wright, a teenager who'd been kicked out by her family when she got pregnant. Linda Chun, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname. An older woman who'd finally left her violent husband after 30 years. Each had arrived at the ranch broken and afraid, but Marcus had watched them slowly find their strength again. The program was intensive but compassionate. Women stayed for an average of 8 months, during which time they received counseling, job training, legal assistance, and childcare support. Sarah had recruited a team of volunteers, including other survivors, social workers, and local business owners who provided internships and employment opportunities. Emma, now a precocious 3-year-old with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, had become the unofficial mascot of the foundation. She moved between the families with the easy acceptance of a child who'd never known anything but love and security, often serving as a bridge for shy children who were struggling to adapt to their new environment. "Mama Sarah," came a small voice from behind Marcus. He turned to see 4-year-old Carlos Santos tugging on his pant leg. "Emma said you have baby horses. Can we see them?" Marcus smiled down at the boy, whose English was improving daily thanks to the ESL classes Sarah had arranged. "They're called foals, and yes, we can go see them. But we need to ask your mama first." The ranch had expanded its livestock operations to include horses, partly for practical reasons and partly because Sarah had discovered that equine therapy was remarkably effective for trauma survivors. Working with the gentle giants helped both women and children rebuild their confidence and learn to trust again. As they walked toward the stables, Carlos chattering excitedly in a mixture of Spanish and English, Marcus reflected on how full the ranch had become. At any given time, there were 20 to 25 people living on the property, the resident families, several full-time staff members, and a rotating group of volunteers who came for weekend workshops and training sessions. The financial sustainability had been a concern initially, but the foundation had attracted significant donations from across the country. The Blackwood trial had raised awareness about the vulnerabilities faced by single mothers, and many people wanted to contribute to a solution. Several major corporations had made substantial commitments, and the state had approved a grant program that helped fund the legal assistance component. But perhaps more importantly, the program was working. Of the 43 women who had completed the program so far, 38 had successfully transitioned to independent living. They'd found jobs, secured stable housing, and rebuilt their lives. Several had gone on to college or trade school. 2 had started their own businesses. 1 had even established a similar program in Nevada. "Uncle Marcus." Emma's voice rang out across the yard as she spotted him with Carlos. She came running from the garden where she'd been helping Linda Chun plant tomatoes, her small hands dirty, and her face bright with joy that the title Uncle Marcus had been Emma's own invention. Even though he'd legally adopted her and she called him Papa in private moments, she decided that all the children at the ranch should call him Uncle Marcus so he could be special to everyone. It was the kind of inclusive thinking that made Marcus incredibly proud of the little girl who'd changed his life. "We're going to see the foals," Emma announced importantly. "Carlos hasn't met Buttercup yet." Buttercup was a month-old Palomino filly who'd been born just after Carlos and his family had arrived. Emma had taken it upon herself to introduce all the new children to the horses, serving as a sort of junior tour guide, with the confidence of someone who'd been around animals her entire life. In the stable, Marcus watched Carlos's eyes widen as he met the gentle Mare Sunshine and her gangly filly. The boy had been largely silent for his first 2 weeks at the ranch, communicating mainly through his mother's translation. But horses, Marcus had learned, spoke a universal language that transcended words. "She's so soft," Carlos whispered in English as Buttercup nuzzled his palm. "She likes you," Emma said authoritatively. Animals can tell when people have good hearts. The simple interaction represented everything the foundation was trying to achieve: healing through connection, confidence through accomplishment, and hope through new experiences. Carlos would go back to his mother that afternoon a little braver, a little more willing to try new things and trust new people. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch had settled into its nighttime quiet, Marcus and Sarah sat on their front porch reviewing applications for the next group of residents. The waiting list was longer than they could accommodate, a sobering reminder of how many women needed help. We got another request from California, Sarah said, reading from a tablet. A women's shelter in Los Angeles wants to send us their caseworker. For training, they're hoping to start a similar program there. The replication requests have been coming in regularly. The Emma's Hope model was being adapted and implemented across the country, creating a network of support that extended far beyond their little ranch in Montana. What do you think about the expansion proposal? Marcus asked. They'd been discussing the possibility of purchasing adjacent land to build a second facility. The original ranch could continue serving its current population, while a new site could house an additional 10 families and include more comprehensive job training facilities. I think we need to be careful not to grow too fast, Sarah said thoughtfully. What makes this work is the personal attention, the family atmosphere. If we get too big, we risk losing what makes us special. It was a valid concern. The success of the program was built on relationships between staff and residents, between families, between the children who played together while their mothers healed together. Scaling up without losing that intimacy would be challenging. Maybe we focus on training more programs like ours instead of expanding this one, Marcus suggested. Help other people start their own foundations. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes and clutching her favorite stuffed horse. I had a bad dream, she said in the small voice she used when she needed comfort. Sarah immediately scooped her up, settling Emma between them on the porch swing. What was the dream about? Sweetheart? The mean lady came back, Emma said, snuggling against her mother. The one who tried to take me away. Marcus felt his protective instincts flare. Emma rarely mentioned the Blackwoods anymore, but occasionally something would trigger a memory or a fear. Victoria Blackwood was currently serving her sentence at a federal prison in Colorado, and Trevor had been released on parole the previous year with strict conditions, including no contact with Emma or Sarah. Remember what we talked about when you have those dreams? Sarah said gently, about how sometimes our minds try to scare us with things that can't really happen anymore. Emma nodded solemnly. The mean lady can't come here because she's in jail, and Daddy won't let anyone hurt us. That's right, Marcus said, stroking Emma's hair. And you know what else? What? You have about 20 aunties and cousins here who would all protect you too. This ranch is full of people who love you. Emma perked up at this reminder. In her young mind, the resident families weren't temporary visitors. They were extended family. She knew all their children's names, remembered their birthdays, and treated each new arrival as a potential playmate and friend. Can I sleep with you tonight? She asked. Of course, Sarah said, carrying Emma toward the house. Marcus followed, checking the doors and windows out of habit. The ranch was secure, with good locks and a security system, but old fears died hard as they settled. Emma between them in the big king-size bed. Marcus marveled at how complete their life felt. The scared young woman he'd found in the snow had become a confident professional and loving mother. The lonely rancher had found his purpose in protecting and nurturing not just his own family, but dozens of others who needed safe harbor. But it was Emma who had truly transformed them all. Her presence had turned a house into a home, a rescue into a love story, and a personal tragedy into a mission that was changing lives across the country. Daddy, Emma whispered as she drifted off to sleep, when I grow up, I want to help people. Like Mama does. I think you already do, Marcus whispered back, just by being yourself. The next morning brought news that would test everything they'd built. Marcus was checking email in his office when he found a message from the federal parole office that made his blood run cold. Trevor Blackwood had violated the terms of his parole and disappeared. He'd missed 2 check-ins and wasn't at his registered address. Marcus immediately called Sheriff Martinez, who was now running for Congress but still kept a close eye on the Blackwood situation. We've been looking for him for 3 days, she reported. His employer says he stopped showing up to work last week. The parole office thinks he might be heading your way. The thought of Trevor coming anywhere near Emma filled Marcus with a rage he hadn't felt since the night he'd found them in the snow. The man had already caused enough damage, abandoning his daughter, enabling his mother's attempt to murder Sarah and Emma, lying in court to protect his family's reputation. The idea that he might try to insert himself back into their lives was unthinkable. "What's the protocol?" Marcus asked. "We've issued a warrant for his arrest. If you see him or any suspicious activity, call immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." Marcus hung up and went to find Sarah, who was in the community center leading a financial literacy workshop for the current residents. He waited until the session ended before pulling her aside to share the news. Sarah's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "We need to increase security without scaring the families." It was exactly the kind of practical thinking that had made her such an effective leader of the foundation. Even facing a potential threat to her own family, her first concern was for the women and children under their protection. They quietly implemented additional safety measures. The security system was upgraded, additional cameras were installed, and Marcus arranged for off-duty deputies to patrol the property. The staff was briefed on the situation without alarming the residents, and emergency protocols were reviewed. It was Emma who noticed the change in atmosphere first. "Why is everyone acting scared?" she asked Sarah during lunch. "Did something bad happen?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have to be extra careful to keep everyone safe. "It's nothing for you to worry about, but if you see any strangers or anything that seems wrong, you come find me or Daddy right away, okay?" Emma nodded seriously. At 3, she was already demonstrating the emotional intelligence that came from being raised in an environment where feelings were acknowledged and processed rather than hidden. The crisis came 2 days later, just as the afternoon therapy session was ending. Marcus was in the barn when he heard car engines approaching fast, too fast for normal visitors. He looked out to see 2 vehicles racing up the drive, a beat-up sedan and a sheriff's patrol car in pursuit. The sedan skidded to a stop near the community center, and Trevor Blackwood stumbled out. He looked terrible, unshaven, wild-eyed, wearing clothes that hadn't been changed in days. In his hand was something that made Marcus's heart stop, a gun. "Sarah!" Trevor screamed toward the building. "Sarah, I want to see my daughter." Marcus grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the house, his mind racing through possibilities. Sarah and Emma were in the community center with 6 other women and their children. The building had been designed with safety in mind, with reinforced doors and a secure room for emergencies. But Trevor was between Marcus and his family. Through the community center windows, Marcus could see figures moving, Sarah herding the group toward the back of the building, following the lockdown procedures they'd practiced but never hoped to use. Sheriff Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone from the patrol car. "Trevor Blackwood, drop your weapon and surrender immediately." But Trevor wasn't listening. He was advancing toward the community center, shouting Emma's name and waving the gun erratically. "She's my daughter. I have rights. I want to see her." Marcus positioned himself behind his truck, rifle ready, but hoping he wouldn't need to use it. His military training from 20 years ago was coming back. Assess the situation. Identify the primary threat. Protect the innocent. "Trevor," Marcus called out, "stop right there. Emma isn't here." It was a lie, but he hoped it might buy time for the sheriff to get into position. Trevor spun toward Marcus's voice, his face twisted with desperation and what looked like the effects of prolonged drug use. "You stole my family," Trevor screamed. "You turned them against me. That's my daughter in there, your family?" Marcus kept his voice level despite the fury building in his chest. "You abandoned them in a blizzard to die. You never wanted Emma. Until now. More patrol cars were arriving, sirens wailing as they formed a perimeter around the property. Marcus could see the tactical team preparing to move, but with civilians in the building, their options were limited. Through the community center window, Marcus caught a glimpse of Sarah's face. She was looking directly at him, and even from a distance, he could see the determination in her eyes. She was protecting everyone in that building with the same fierce courage she'd shown throughout their entire relationship. Trevor was becoming more agitated, clearly under the influence of something that was affecting his judgment. I just want to see her. I just want to tell her I'm sorry. Then put down the gun and surrender, Sheriff Martinez called through the megaphone. We'll arrange a supervised visit through the courts. But Trevor was beyond reasoning. The combination of drugs, desperation, and years of resentment had pushed him to a breaking point. He turned back toward the community center and raised his weapon. Marcus didn't hesitate. Years of hunting and military training guided his shot, and Trevor dropped before he could fire. The gun skittered across the gravel, harmless now. In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus could hear Emma crying inside the building, not the terrified wail of a traumatized child, but the frustrated sobs of a 3-year-old who'd been interrupted during playtime and didn't understand why everyone was acting strange. The siege was over, but its impact would ripple through the Foundation for months to come. The aftermath of Trevor's attack tested the Foundation in ways no one had anticipated. In the immediate hours following the shooting, the ranch transformed into a crisis response center. Paramedics pronounced Trevor dead at the scene, while grief counselors worked with the traumatized families who had witnessed the confrontation. Emma, surprisingly, seemed the least affected by the immediate chaos. She'd been in the secure room with the other children during the lockdown, playing quietly with blocks while Sarah kept them all calm with stories and songs. To her, it had been an unexpected indoor playtime, nothing more. But the adults understood the gravity of what had happened. Marcus had killed a man to protect his family and the families under their care. It was justified, legally and morally. But the weight of taking a life settled heavily on his shoulders in the days that followed. I keep thinking about the Trevor I first met, Sarah confided to Marcus 3 days later as they walked the perimeter of the ranch together. It was their first quiet moment alone since the shooting. He wasn't evil then. Weak maybe, selfish, but not violent. Marcus nodded, understanding her need to process the complex emotions surrounding Trevor's death. Drugs change people. Prison changes people. He made choices that led him down a dark path. I know, and I know you saved lives that day. But it still feels tragic, like we failed him somehow. It was exactly the kind of compassionate response Marcus had come to expect from his wife. Even after everything Trevor had put her through, she could still mourn the person he might have been. The media attention following the shooting was intense but generally sympathetic. The story of a single father protecting his family and a house full of vulnerable women and children resonated with the public. Donations to the foundation actually increased in the weeks following the incident, with thousands of people expressing support for their mission. But not everyone was supportive. Victoria Blackwood, still in federal prison, had somehow managed to hire a new lawyer who filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Marcus and the foundation. The suit claimed that Trevor had been trying to reform his life and reconnect with his daughter when he was murdered by Marcus in an unprovoked attack. The legal maneuvering was as transparent as it was offensive, but it created additional stress for everyone involved. Vaughn assured them that the lawsuit had no merit. The shooting had been clearly justified self-defense, with multiple witnesses and video evidence supporting Marcus's actions. But fighting bogus litigation was expensive and emotionally draining. Never stop, Sarah said one evening as they reviewed legal documents in Marcus's office. Even from prison, she's still trying to destroy us. Let her try, Marcus replied grimly. We've survived her worst before. We'll survive this too. But the real test came when several families in the program decided to leave early, spooked by the violence and worried about their own safety. Marcus couldn't blame them. They'd come to the ranch seeking safety, only to find themselves in the middle of a life-or-death confrontation. Maria Santos was among those who chose to leave, gathering her twins and their few possessions with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," she told Sarah during their goodbye, "but I can't risk my children's safety. What if there are others like him? What if his family comes for revenge?" It was a rational fear, and Sarah didn't try to talk her out of leaving. The foundation had always been based on choice and empowerment. Women were free to leave whenever they felt it was best for their families, but each departure felt like a personal failure to Marcus. The ranch had been a sanctuary, a place where broken families could heal in safety. Trevor's attack had shattered that sense of security, at least temporarily. The solution came from an unexpected source: the residents who had chosen to stay. Led by Linda Chun, who had emerged as a natural leader among the women, they organized a community meeting to address everyone's concerns. "We can't let fear win," Linda announced to the gathered group. "That's exactly what people like the Blackwoods want: for us to scatter, to give up, to stop believing that we deserve better." Jessica Wright, the teenager who had been kicked out by her family, spoke up from the back of the room. "This place saved my life. Before I came here, I was sleeping in my car with my baby. I was going to give her up for adoption because I couldn't take care of her. Now I'm enrolled in college and I have a job at the veterinary clinic in town. I'm not going to let one crazy man destroy what we've built here." One by one, the women shared their stories and their commitment to staying. They talked about the friendships they'd formed, the skills they'd learned, and the confidence they'd gained. Most importantly, they talked about their children, kids who were thriving in an environment where they felt safe and loved. "Our kids need to see that we don't run from bullies," said Carmen Rodriguez, a woman who had arrived 2 months earlier with her 5-year-old son after escaping an abusive marriage. "They need to see that we stand up for what's right, even when it's scary." The meeting ended with a unanimous decision to not only stay, but to actively work on making the ranch even safer and stronger. Security improvements were planned, emergency procedures were refined, and a buddy system was established so no one ever had to face challenges alone. Emma, who had been coloring quietly in the corner during the meeting, looked up as the women were discussing their plans. "Are we going to paint the fence?" she asked innocently. The unexpected question broke the tension in the room, and everyone laughed. Sarah scooped Emma up and explained that they were talking about different kinds of improvements. "But we could paint the fence too," Marcus said, with a smile. "What color do you think it should be?" "Rainbow," Emma declared immediately, causing another round of laughter. And so, in a perfect example of how Emma continued to bring joy and lightness to even the darkest situations, the community decided to paint sections of the ranch fence in bright, cheerful colors. It became a symbol of resilience and hope, a declaration that they would not be intimidated or driven away. The fence painting became a community-wide project that took place over several weekends. Volunteers came from town to help, including many people who had been inspired by the Foundation's mission. Local businesses donated paint and supplies. Even Sheriff Martinez, who was now Congressman-elect Martinez, showed up with her family to help. Emma appointed herself the director of color coordination, making serious decisions about which sections should be blue, which should be yellow, and where the special rainbow section should go. Her authority was accepted without question by adults who towered over her. Another example of the natural leadership qualities she was developing. But the most significant development came when Sarah made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Marcus. "I've been accepted into the doctoral program at the University of Montana," she told him one evening as they watched Emma play with the other children in the newly painted play area behind the Community Center. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and concern. That's amazing. What would you study? Clinical psychology with a focus on trauma recovery in families. The program would let me design my own research project, and I want to study the long-term outcomes for children who grow up in environments like this. It was exactly the kind of groundbreaking work that could benefit thousands of families, but Marcus understood the implications. A doctoral program would mean years of additional study, time away from the ranch, and significant changes to their daily routine. What does the timeline look like? He asked. 4 years, but most of the coursework can be done online or through intensive summer sessions. The research component would actually be based here at the ranch, studying our own families and outcomes. The more Sarah explained the program, the more excited Marcus became. This wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a chance to scientifically validate and improve the model they'd created, potentially leading to better programs across the country. When would you start? Next fall, when Emma starts pre-K. The timing actually works out perfectly. They spent the next hour discussing logistics and possibilities. Sarah's research could attract additional funding for the foundation, perhaps. Even federal grants that would allow them to expand their services. More importantly, it would provide the scientific evidence needed to convince skeptics that their approach actually worked. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's announcement that she was hungry and wanted the pasta with the tiny trees, her name for broccoli mac and cheese. As they headed inside for dinner, Marcus reflected on how Sarah continued to surprise him with her ambition and vision. That night, after Emma was asleep and the ranch had settled into its peaceful evening rhythm, Marcus and Sarah sat on their front porch discussing the future. The painted fence sections were visible in the moonlight, a colorful reminder of the community they'd built together. "I got a call from the governor's office today," Marcus said, sharing news he'd been saving for the right moment. "About what?" "They want to nominate the foundation for the state's humanitarian award. Apparently, we're being considered for recognition at the national level too." Sarah looked surprised. "What would that mean?" "Visibility, credibility, probably more funding, opportunities, and definitely more requests for consultation from other states." The recognition was gratifying, but it also represented new responsibilities and challenges. Success brought its own pressures, and they would need to be careful not to lose sight of their core mission in the excitement of expansion and recognition. "Sometimes I can't believe how far we've come," Sarah said, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. 3 years ago, I was a terrified girl with a newborn baby, convinced that my life was over. Now we're running a foundation that's helping dozens of families and potentially influencing policy at the national level." "You were never just a terrified girl," Marcus corrected gently. "You were always someone with incredible strength and potential. You just needed the right circumstances to let it flourish." Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom window, where she was talking to her stuffed animals before falling asleep. She was telling them a story about a ranch where sad mommies come to be happy again, and everyone gets to paint fences and ride horses. "She understands more than we give her credit for," Sarah observed. "She's growing up in a world where helping others is normal, where strength means protecting people who need protection, not taking advantage of them." It was exactly the kind of environment they'd hoped to create, not just for the families in their program, but for Emma herself. She was learning lessons about compassion, resilience, and social responsibility that would shape her entire life. The next morning brought a delegation from the state capitol, including the lieutenant governor and several department heads. They were conducting a formal review of the foundation's programs as part of the award nomination process. Emma, dressed in her favorite overalls and cowboy boots, appointed herself the official tour guide. She led the distinguished visitors around the ranch with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to be heard and respected. "This is where the sad horses live until they get happy again," she explained at the rehabilitation paddock. where they kept horses recovering from injury or neglect. And this is where the mommies learn to drive tractors so they can get good jobs. The officials were charmed by Emma's commentary, but Marcus could see that they were also taking careful note of the facilities, the programs, and the obvious care that went into every aspect of the operation. The visit concluded with interviews with several of the current residents, women who spoke eloquently about the impact the program had had on their lives. Linda Chun, who had completed her GED and was now enrolled in online college courses, served as the primary spokesperson. When I arrived here 8 months ago, I was 53 years old and I'd never lived alone in my entire life, she told the delegation. I went from my parents' house to my husband's house, and I thought I was too old to start over. This place taught me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. The lieutenant governor was visibly moved by the testimonies. What you've created here isn't just a program, she told Marcus and Sarah afterward. It's a model for how communities should support their most vulnerable members. That evening, as the official delegation departed and the ranch returned to its normal routine, Marcus found himself on the front porch again with Sarah and Emma. It had become their tradition, ending each day together, sharing what they'd learned. An experienced Emma was working on a drawing she'd started during the officials' visit, a picture of the ranch with all the buildings, the painted fence, and stick figures representing everyone who lived there. In her artistic vision, everyone was smiling and holding hands. Daddy, Emma said without looking up from her drawing, when I grow up, I want to live here forever and help people like you and Mama do. You don't have to decide that now, sweetheart, Sarah said gently. You might want to see the world, go to college in different places, try different kinds of work. Emma considered this seriously, then shook her head. I like it here. This is where families get fixed. The simple statement captured something profound about the work they were doing. Emma understood, with the clarity that only children possess, that the ranch was a place of healing and transformation. She'd grown up watching broken families become whole again, and it seemed natural to her that she would continue that work. As the stars began to appear in the clear Montana sky, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a simple act of human kindness, rescuing a young mother and baby from a storm, had grown into something that was changing lives across the country. The painted fence sections glowed softly in the moonlight, each color representing a different family that had found hope within the ranch's boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, sitting on the front porch with his wife and daughter, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of a community at rest, Marcus knew they had found something precious and permanent. They had created a place where love was stronger than fear, where second chances were always possible, and where broken pieces could be transformed into something beautiful. The story that had begun with abandonment and cruelty had become one of redemption, hope, and the enduring power of choosing to help rather than harm. And as Emma had said in her 3-year-old wisdom, this was where families got fixed, including their own. 5 years later, Dr. Sarah Whitmore stood at the podium of the National Conference on Family Trauma Recovery, looking out at an audience of social workers, psychologists, and policymakers from across the globe. Her doctoral dissertation on community-based healing models had become required reading in graduate programs nationwide, and the Emma's Hope Foundation had been replicated in 43 states and 6 countries. When we first opened our doors, Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from years of public speaking and advocacy, we thought we were simply providing temporary housing for women in crisis. What we discovered was that healing happens in community, that children thrive when they see their mothers empowered, and that sometimes the most profound transformations occur when we create spaces where people can rebuild their lives with dignity. In the audience, Marcus sat with 8-year-old Emma, who was sketching in a notebook while half listening to her mother's presentation. Emma had insisted on coming to the conference, curious about the important meeting where Mama talks about our ranch. She dressed carefully for the occasion in a navy blue dress and her favorite, cowboy boots, a combination that perfectly captured her unique personality. The numbers Sarah presented were staggering. The original Emma's Hope Foundation had served over 200 families directly, with a 94% success rate in transitioning women to independent living. The replicated programs had helped thousands more. But the true measure of success, Sarah argued, wasn't in statistics but in the children who were growing up in homes free from violence and fear. The most important question we can ask, Sarah continued, isn't whether our programs are cost-effective or administratively efficient. It's whether we're raising a generation of children who understand that their worth isn't determined by their circumstances at birth, and that healing is always possible when communities choose to support rather than abandon their most vulnerable members. After the presentation, Sarah was surrounded by conference attendees eager to learn more about implementing similar programs. Marcus watched with pride as his wife fielded questions with the expertise of someone who had lived every aspect of the work they were discussing. Dr. Whitmore asked a social worker from Oregon, "What would you say is the single most important factor in the success of your model?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Relationship. Everything else, the housing, the job training, the legal assistance, those are important tools. But what actually changes lives is the experience of being genuinely cared for by people who don't expect anything in return. Emma looked up from her sketching at that moment, having caught her mother's words. "Like when you found us in the snow." "Daddy," she said to Marcus in a stage whisper that carried across the nearby conversations. Several people turned to look at them, and Marcus felt the familiar mixture of pride and protectiveness that came whenever Emma's origin story was mentioned. In public, she knew the basics of how they'd become a family, but at 8 years old, she understood it more as an adventure story than the life or death crisis it had actually been. Later that evening, at the conference's closing dinner, Sarah was presented with the National Award for Innovation in Social Services. As she accepted the crystal sculpture that would join the growing collection of awards in her office at the ranch, she thought about how surreal the moment was. "This award doesn't belong to me," she said in her acceptance speech. "It belongs to every woman who had the courage to start over, every child who adapted to a new life with resilience and hope, and every community member who chose to help rather than judge. It belongs to my husband Marcus, who showed me that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply give them a safe place to heal." The standing ovation that followed seemed to last forever. In the audience, Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched the woman he'd fallen in love with receive recognition for work that had grown from their personal tragedy into something that was changing the world. Emma, unimpressed by the formal ceremony, had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Even at 8, she was more interested in the day-to-day work of the ranch than in awards and recognition. She helped with feeding the horses, read stories to younger children in the program, and had started a small garden where she grew vegetables to donate to the food bank in town. The flight home to Montana was quiet, with Emma sleeping across 2 seats and Sarah reviewing notes from the conference. Marcus looked out the window at the landscape passing below, thinking about how different their life had become from anything he could have imagined. The ranch now employed 15 full-time staff members and hosted regular groups of volunteers from universities and service organizations. The original guest house had been expanded twice, and they'd built a second residential facility on adjacent land they'd purchased. The waiting list for the program was 6 months long, despite having increased capacity every year. But success had brought new challenges. The media attention was constant, and maintaining privacy for the families in the program required careful management. Funding, while substantial, required endless grant applications and donor relations. Most challenging of all was the emotional toll of working with trauma survivors day after day, year after year. Sarah had addressed this in her dissertation, writing about the importance of self-care and community support for service providers. She'd implemented regular counseling for all staff members and had created a sabbatical program that allowed employees to take extended breaks without losing their positions. "Mama," Emma said as they landed in Billings, "did everyone at the conference like your speech?" "I think so," Sarah replied. "But more importantly, I hope it helps other people start programs like ours." "Good," Emma said with 8-year-old certainty. "More kids should have places like our ranch." The drive home took them through Glacier Valley as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Emma chattered about the plane ride and the fancy hotel, but as they turned onto the familiar dirt road that led to the ranch, she fell silent, looking out the window with the satisfaction of someone who was truly coming home. The ranch bustled with activity as they pulled up to the main house. 3 new families had arrived while they'd been at the conference, and Emma immediately spotted the children playing in the yard. She was out of the truck before Marcus had fully stopped, running to introduce herself to potential new friends. "She's amazing," Sarah said, watching their daughter seamlessly integrate the newcomers into whatever game was in progress. "She gets that from her mother," Marcus replied, then added more seriously, "Do you ever worry about the pressure we're putting on her? Growing up in the spotlight, having her personal story be so public, it was a concern they'd discussed many times." Emma's early life was well documented in news articles, conference presentations, and academic papers. While they'd always been careful to protect her privacy and dignity, there was no hiding the fact that she was the inspiration for everything they'd built. "I worry about lots of things," Sarah admitted, "but look at her. She's confident, empathetic, and she has a strong sense of purpose. Those aren't burdens, they're gifts." As if to prove Sarah's point, Emma appeared at the truck window with a shy 5-year-old boy in tow. "This is Daniel," she announced. "His mama is Jessica, and they just got here from Texas. Can he help me feed the horses?" The introduction was classic Emma, matter of fact, inclusive, and immediately focused on shared activities rather than differences. She'd grown up in an environment where new people arrived regularly, often scared and uncertain, and she developed an intuitive ability to help them feel welcome. "Of course," Marcus said, "but wash your hands first and remember the safety rules." As Emma led Daniel toward the barn, chattering about the different horses and their personalities, Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look of shared pride and amazement. Their daughter was growing up to be exactly the kind of person they'd hoped, kind without being naive, strong without being harsh, and naturally inclined to help others. That evening, after the new families had been settled and the daily routine of the ranch had resumed, Marcus found himself in his office reviewing applications for the Foundation's newest initiative, a mentorship program that would connect current residents with women who had successfully completed the program. The idea had come from Linda Chun, who had graduated from the program 3 years earlier and was now a college graduate working as a paralegal in Billings. She'd volunteered to mentor new residents, sharing practical advice about everything from job interviews to budgeting to dealing with the emotional challenges of starting over. "The women who've been through this understand things that even the most compassionate counselors can't," Linda had explained. "They know what it feels like to be ashamed of needing help, to be afraid of making the wrong choice, to wonder if they're strong enough to build a different life." The mentorship program had been an immediate success, with former residents eagerly volunteering to guide newcomers through the same journey they'd completed. It created a sense of continuity and hope that strengthened the entire community. Marcus was reviewing applications when Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a tired but satisfied expression. "How did the intake meetings go?" he asked. "Good. Challenging. One of the new arrivals is a grandmother who's been raising her grandchildren since their mother died. She's never lived independently, and she's terrified, but she's determined to give those kids a stable home. It was exactly the kind of complex family situation that the foundation was designed to address. The program had evolved over the years to serve not just single mothers, but any family structure where women were trying to create safety and stability for children in their care. And the other two families? Sisters who escaped together with their children. Domestic violence situation. They've been planning this for months, saving money and gathering documents. They're scared but incredibly well prepared. Marcus nodded, familiar with the pattern. The women who succeeded in the program were often those who had spent months or even years planning their escape, gathering resources and building the internal strength needed to make such a massive life change. Emma wants to show the new kids her garden tomorrow, Sarah added with a smile. She's very proud of the tomatoes. Emma's garden had become one of her most serious responsibilities. She'd researched which vegetables grew best in Montana's climate, planned the layout with mathematical precision, and maintained detailed records of planting dates and harvest yields. The produce was shared with the community kitchen and donated to local food banks, giving Emma a tangible way to contribute to the ranch's mission. Speaking of Emma, Marcus said, I got a call from her teacher today. Apparently, she gave a presentation about the ranch for her social studies project, and several parents want to organize a volunteer day. What did you tell them? That we'd love to have them, but they need to go through the proper background check and training process first. No shortcuts just because their kids go to school with Emma. It was a balance they'd learn to maintain carefully. The ranch's success depended on community support, but protecting the privacy and safety of the families in the program was always the top priority. Sarah settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk, a position that had become their traditional end-of-day check-in spot. I've been thinking about something, she said. What's that? Emma's going to be 9 next month. She's old enough to start understanding some of the more complex aspects of what we do here. I think it might be time to have some deeper conversations about trauma, healing, and why some families need extra help. Marcus considered this. They'd always been honest with Emma about the ranch's mission, but they'd kept the explanations age-appropriate. As she got older and more observant, she was naturally asking more sophisticated questions about why some mothers cried during therapy sessions and why some children were afraid of loud noises. What did you have in mind? Maybe we could include her in some of the educational components. Let her sit in on the presentations we do for visiting groups. Help her understand the research and the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish. It was a thoughtful approach that would satisfy Emma's curiosity while also preparing her for the reality that their work would always be part of her life. Whether she chose to continue the Foundation's mission as an adult or pursue a completely different path, she would always be connected to this community and this work. I think that's a great idea, Marcus said. She's definitely ready for it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Through the office window, Marcus could see the lights in the residential buildings where 23 women and 31 children were safely sleeping. Families that might not have survived without the sanctuary they'd created. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you that night? Marcus asked quietly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes. But I try not to dwell on it. What matters is what did happen, that you chose to help, that we chose to build something together, that we've created a place where other families can find what we found. And what's that? Hope, safety, the chance to become who we're meant to be instead of being defined by the worst things that happen to us. Emma's voice drifted down the hallway as she talked to herself while getting ready for bed. At 8, she still narrated her activities, describing her plans for tomorrow, and reviewing the events of the day. Tonight, she was excited about showing Daniel and the other new children how to properly groom a horse. "She's going to be incredible," Sarah said, listening to their daughter's enthusiastic monologue. "She already is," Marcus replied. "But I know what you mean. She's going to change the world." Maybe. Or maybe she'd just continue the work of making sure that kids like her always have a safe place to land when their world falls apart. It was a legacy that both of them could be proud of, not just the awards and recognition, but the simple fact that they'd created something that would outlast them. Emma's Hope Foundation would continue long after they were gone, providing sanctuary for families who needed it most. As they turned off the office lights and headed toward their bedroom, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started with a terrified young woman and her baby abandoned in a snowstorm had become a movement that was changing how society supported its most vulnerable members. The painted fence sections were still visible in the moonlight, though they'd been touched up and expanded many times over the years. New families arrived regularly, adding their own colors and their own stories to the ever-growing tapestry of hope that surrounded the ranch. In her bedroom, Emma was finally quiet, exhausted by the excitement of the day and the travel. Marcus peeked in to check on her and found her sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed horse, and a drawing pad filled with sketches of the conference still open beside her. The drawing she'd been working on during Sarah's presentation was visible on the top page, a picture of the ranch with all its buildings, the painted fence, and dozens of stick figures representing the families who had found healing within its boundaries. At the bottom, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Where families get fixed and love grows." Marcus smiled and quietly closed the door. Emma's simple wisdom had captured something that all their research and presentations and awards had tried to express, that the ranch was, at its heart, a place where love grew. Love for family, love for community, love for the possibility that tomorrow could be better than today. As he joined Sarah in their bedroom, Marcus thought about how perfect their life had become, not in the sense of being without challenges, but in the sense of being exactly what it was meant to be. They'd taken their own broken pieces and used them to build something beautiful, something that helped other people transform their broken pieces into hope. The story that had begun with abandonment and cruelty had become one of redemption, healing, and the enduring power of choosing love over fear. And tomorrow, as always, there would be new families arriving, new children learning that they were worthy of love and safety, and new proof that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply give them a chance to rebuild their life. In the quiet darkness of the Montana night, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of a community at rest, Marcus and Sarah fell asleep, knowing they had found their purpose and their family in the most unexpected way. They had kept the promise they'd made to each other and to Emma on that snowy night so many years ago. They had created a place where families could heal, where love could grow, and where second chances were always possible. The ranch would continue its work long after they were gone, a testament to the truth that one act of kindness, one choice to help rather than walk away, could ripple outward to change countless lives. And at the center of it all would always be the memory of a young mother and her baby, abandoned in a snowstorm but rescued by love, who had taught the world that family is not about blood or circumstances, but about choosing to care for each other through whatever storms may come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.